I did my O-levels. There's no way I could have gotten a part-time job to subsidize whatever I wanted to do that my parents couldn't do for me. I noticed that when I went back to the UK, I could do so. I could work part-time. I could work part-time as student. So it goes back to how we industrialize, diversify the economy, so we can create more job opportunities for the young people of Africa. For the young people.
Thank you very much.
Wow. I know why I was placed. I know why I was placed. But first of all, Professor Rama, Dr. Fofak, and the Afreximbank team. Congratulations on 30 years of just being innovative, of how you bring Africa together. So I have two jobs that I had to be able to earn my pocket money. My father, I grew up in Kano in Nigeria. My father is an engineer. But worked for the civil service. To complement my parents, to complement their income. My mother was a nurse. They had a block molding factory, and they also invested in the Nigerian stock market. So I had two jobs that would help me pocket money. One was to go and man the block molding site, and be able to write down what customers were looking for and all of that. And the other was basically to read annual reports of the companies my parents had invested in, and make summaries. And my father was, looking for the third child. He tried on my oldest sister to become an engineer. And so I was the one he was banking. But after spending time in a block molding site, I decided that finance was more interesting and exciting. And of course, spent most of my career in finance.
In finance. You also wanted to be an
inventor. You know that, yes, you know that. Do you want to hear that story? I'll be very brief. So my mother wanted me to be a medical doctor, my father wanted me to be an engineer, and I said, in boarding school, I went to the guidance council, I was like, I don't want to be an engineer. My father was like, everything was so logical, and I didn't want to be a hospital, and I didn't want to be a hospital. The guidance council said, okay, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be an inventor. Voila. Almost 50 years on, I haven't been an inventor. My sister says I'm working for development banks. I used to invent papers. So.
Never too late. Never too late. Okay, Mr. Olajide, obviously your main area is software engineering. Now, it's interesting because this is a notoriously young sector. You draw from a young pool. And yet there is this misconception, isn't there, that when you look at GDP and growth on the African continent, many countries will say, well, we can't do it because we've got a population that is skewed to an overly young, growing population. I mean, how true is that? And is that really the cause of hindering growth in a country? I mean, how key are the young, and what role will they play in delivering the AFCFTA?
Excellent, great question. Having such a youthful population on the African continent is a tremendous, tremendous advantage globally. There are lots of countries in the West and other places where it's an aging population and you have a lot more young people working to support larger, older people. So in that case, there's a distortion. And they're not seeing the growth that they need, and they're very concerned about their futures. In Africa, we're gifted with this blessing of an incredibly young, vibrant, expressive, youthful population, and what we need to do is take advantage of that opportunity that we have. So I don't want to talk in abstract terms or policies. I want to talk about what I'm doing, what others are doing, in real tangible terms that we can all understand. You're right. One of the companies that I'm mostly known for is Access, the global healthcare technology company, the leader in the world in technology for healthcare at home. And as part of that global healthcare delivery infrastructure, we have operations all over the world, including Nigeria, large business in India, in the Philippines, Canada, and we're the leader in the world at what we do. Now, as we've done more work on the African continent, I've learned so much. And as we engage the youth in Africa, I was telling someone else over lunch that the young engineers that we work with in Nigeria are so talented, and because building technology on mobile devices is native to them, it's what they know how to do. Believe it or not, in our global software delivery infrastructure, the best engineers that work on mobile devices are on the African continent in Nigeria. And when our clients are using our technology and they're amazed at what we're doing, it's because it's coming from here, from this place, because they're really good at doing that. And as we scale that team, I didn't realize that eventually, and it's a surprise to a lot of people, we employ the largest number of software engineers in Nigeria. I didn't even know that. It had happened before someone mentioned that to me. So what I am saying is there's a lot of value, there's a lot of quality, there's a lot of excellence that Africa is contributing to the world. And in our case, our clients are benefiting tremendously from that. And what we're focused on now is how we can scale that. I've shared with folks that I am looking to employ thousands and thousands and thousands of software engineers on the African continent. We don't need them just for what we need to do. I want to make sure they're trained, they're upskilled, and want to make sure they can work and go do work for lots of other organizations and strengthen that ecosystem. Because the future, this digital future for the African continent and the rest of the world that we're envisioning needs to be built by software engineers. And these are young people that have a natural affinity for that, so they need to be supported, we need to invest in them. And I think what you see matters. They need to see visions of success of people that have done similar work, that have gone on to great success, and realize that if he can do it, I can do it too. And I'll close on one very important point about how Africa contributes to the world. I left to go to college in the US at 16. I am proudly, very proudly African. I'm a product of the African continent, and the work that we've done in the technology space leads the world. So there are lots of similar success stories about people that are from this continent, are world class about what they've done. And this has been an organization built in the US. We lead the market in the US and other parts of the world. So it's important that stories like this get out, so others like me and the millions and the hundreds of millions of the African continent know that if that guy can do it, certainly they can do it too.
Okay. Just think ahead. I'm hopefully going to have time to ask you, if you talk about this entrepreneurial ecosystem and how to do it, I'd like you to think about whether the AFCFTA in its current form provides that, and how do we actually turbo boost it? Because that's what we heard this morning. Not yet. Just to think about it. That'll be our next question. In the meantime, I'm going to turn to Mrs. Whitaker here. Now, you're recognized a leading expert when it comes to African trade, but also investment and business. You were one of the architects of AGOA, which comes to an end in 2025. What are the lessons learned so far from that time dealing with duty-free treatment of goods? Because that is part of, the AFCFTA. You want less friction. You want rules of origin, this is movement of goods. What have you learned where you think, low-hanging fruit, you do this now and you'll see quick returns?
What I've learned is that the most important lesson I learned is that you don't need a lot of people to shift things. When we look at AGOA and that removed tariffs and quotas at the time, we were only 5 people that started this movement, 5 in the US and 5 in Africa, and we decided we wanted to do something. And the other thing that I've learned is that trade and market access is only a part of the equation. We got some good results, but we did not get the kind of transformation that we wanted. Because the truth of the matter is that Africa has, like you've said, an incredible demographic dividend. Today, as we sit here, 1 in every 3 children born in the world is African. By 2050, Africa will have more people of working age in their prime than China, Europe, and India combined. So will this be a demographic dividend or will it be a demographic disaster? That is the question today. Trade access is only a part, and I think is the small part, because we did our part, but there's so much more to do. Where the genius of transformation will come from is what Afreximbank is doing, is what you are doing. What you're doing is working, and what you're doing, combining demography with productivity. If we do not combine demography with productivity, we will not get the kind of transformation, we will not unlock the genius. And what I learned from AGOA, it's going to take market access, it's going to take the power of examples, it's going to take the kind of commitment that many of you are doing. It's going to take connections, it's going to take the global approach, it's going to take mobilizing resources. Because I'll end here, what has confused me about all these years in having a company, we have worked with some of the biggest companies in the world, bringing them into Africa, and now we're investing ourselves. The thing that troubles me probably the most, I don't think that we have a money problem in Africa. When I look at, according to the African Development Bank, Africa loses $150 billion a year due to corruption. When I look at illicit financial flows from corporations, it's costing $14 billion a year. When I look at, there's about $500 million left on the table from just inefficiencies. When I look at the fact that you have subsoil assets, the African Development Bank puts it at 6.2 trillion. Paul Collier says it's 28 trillion. The truth is we don't know because those assets have not been surveyed, and you cannot trust. I mean, commodity prices are not constant, but what we know for sure, we have a lot of capital. I am not even as concerned about African debt as some people are, because as long as the debt is used for productivity, the continent will be fine. So I think we need to mobilize all these strategies, all these ideas. Afreximbank has been an excellent catalyst for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Malai, lovely to have you on stage. I spent some time in Triangle, in the Low Veld in Zimbabwe. Yes. I'm really interested to know, you've been investing for around 20 years in African companies. Yeah. Why African companies? Wouldn't you have got quicker returns going away from the continent? What is it about Africa that excites you?
Look, I mean, when you look at the numbers, between now and 2030, 140 million new African consumers. By 2050, 800 million Africans entering the workspace. Within the next 27 years, 500 million people moving from the countryside into urban areas. I mean, there's nothing that provides an opportunity as big as that. And as you look at all the other markets, America is only going to have 25 million new people coming to the market. The West, in terms of Europe, has got a declining market. China has only got 6 million people entering the market in the next 17 years. So if you look at the demographics, a quarter of the world's population will be in Africa by 2050. So where do you want to be investing in declining markets or in markets that are showing growth? Also, if you look at industrialization, there's such a dearth of industrialization. So the opportunity to beneficiate is significant. I'll look at just one product in which we invested, which was tobacco. It was a highly racialized industry in Zimbabwe. There were 5,000 white farmers growing 200 million kgs of tobacco, and it was all exported raw. We came in, we approached government to try and get to do contract farming of tobacco. It was 2 years, being labeled everything under the sun. But at the end of it, we got contracting, which now migrates 1,000 farmers into 150,000 farmers of mixed race. And the quantity of tobacco produced has grown 35%. But for me, what was the important part was that we're now able to work down the value chain and start manufacturing the end product. So Africa has always been an importer of finished goods and an exporter of raw material. And I think that's what we need to look at changing on the continent, because just looking in the tobacco sector, there's a 15 times value multiple between raw tobacco that we exported and cigarettes. So if you look at Zimbabwe with 1 billion of exports of tobacco, as cigarettes, that's $15 billion per annum. So those are the opportunities that we have on the continent. And if we start working on different value chains from an agro perspective, from an industrial perspective, I mean, what we can do in terms of the 2.7 trillion, I think we can very quickly leapfrog it to numbers much more significant. So Africa is the continent of the future.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Mr. Ocheredako now. And you work with the Africa Prosperity Network. When we're talking about prosperity, we've heard that there isn't a money problem on the continent. There are issues, though, with trickle down, down to sort of the nation's citizens. What's happening? Why isn't that prosperity spreading out? It's going to have to. I mean, can the AFCFTA deliver that?
I think so. My understanding of capitalism is that, first of all, you have to have the capacity to capitalize on opportunities. And I think that's why education is important. Because once you educate the people, once you give them the skills and the ability to think beyond maybe their limitation, they themselves can do stuff for themselves. But then you say, how does it trickle down? We heard the story of Dangote. It took a president to see that he's a winner and to support him. Imagine if you share Dangote's wealth, which I don't know, but if you share it among 50 million Nigerians, I doubt it that after a month, you can feed them after a month. You can't. So I think it's important that we should not be afraid to aggregate wealth in the hands of people who can create wealth. And I think really it's important we do so, because that money could have trickled down and it would have just vanished. But because it was allowed to concentrate on a few hands, okay, hands that are productive, they managed to then industrialize. Because at the end of the day, if things are going to trickle down, there are about 2-3 things that we need to do. And I said the first one is education. So I think we should encourage governments to educate their people. It's expensive, but it's absolutely critical. The second thing is that if AFCFTA is to work, we must have things to sell to ourselves. Okay? And I would take the example in Ghana. And I think if that example is supported here in Ghana and even emulated across the continent, it will work. They have what they call one district, one factory concept. What happens is that you have a president who came with a vision that he wants to industrialize. But in order to industrialize, let's look at the raw materials in the various districts of the country and find a way to add value to them. But to do so, he was also lucky because the president before also brought in a law called the Ghana Exim Bank, or which created the Ghana Exim Bank, and which takes about 0.75% of what they call the Export Development Levy. So that goes straight into an Exim Bank, which then gives low credit, sort of interest rate credit to entities that want to go into industries across the country. And within 4 or 5 years, they supported about 278 factories. 104 of them are working and have created over 150,000 direct and indirect jobs. So there must be a deliberate effort to industrialize, and that should come from policy and also the preparedness of the private sector to take advantage of those policies. So for me, yes, education is important. Yes, industrialization is important. But even when it comes to industrialization, what can the Africa's corporate sector do? The rules of origin has been put in place by AFCFTA. But it means that we must be able to find the raw materials within the continent. And if we find a way for industries in various countries across the continent to find out what they are good at, what you have, and start talking to each other, okay? So for instance, I can get oil from Ghana. There's a refinery in Nigeria that I can send it to refine. Then we find a way to keep the value within the continent. So we must, and for me, I don't buy the argument that free trade within the continent can also hurt smaller economies. The smaller economies must find where their strengths are and then take advantage of the broader market. That's really where I think the focus should be. But don't think that, because I remember I was in one country, I won't mention it, in Central Africa, and they were skeptical about a single continental market concept. Because even though they have a large market or population, they haven't industrialized fast enough. But then I was saying to them, focus on the things that you have advantage in, or potentially you have advantage in, and then go that. So I believe that, look, the AFCFTA is the way to go, but in order for it to work for us, the private sector in Africa must own it. We cannot leave it to the politicians. Correct. They have done their work. But even in order for their work to work, we must own it. We must sit on the table, think together, plan together, work with them together to make it work. Because at the end of the day, if the rules say that you can set up a bank in Ethiopia, okay? But then the domestic rule in Ethiopia says that you must be Ethiopian in order to set up a bank in Ethiopia. Then you have a conflict between domestic law and then the continental law. How do we ensure that we harmonize our rules of engagement so that businesses can trade across borders and not face different rules and conflicting rules? Those are things that, but I think if we start talking as business, we'd let the politicians know that, look, we see the single continental market as the way to go for prosperity on our continent. And we engage them. I think it will work. And that is why we set up the Africa Prosperity Network. And the idea is that every year we have dialogues where we bring political leaders with business leaders to review what has been done in, if you like, implementing the AFCFTA project and what should be done to take it to the next level. And I think it's very important.
That'll be our next point of this session. So I wonder if you could all just bear that in mind. I know we're pushed for time, but Masoto, you heard what was said there. So you have got the background of the World Bank, the AFDB. You've traveled extensively, the Exchange Commission for Nigeria. You're hearing what the entrepreneurs are saying. You're hearing what the academics are saying. Is that achievable?
Oh, absolutely, but only if we focus on doing and not talking. I think there's still a lot of talking
Do you know
on
what?
the continent.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. I know it's rude, but I don't know how many, I was part of the launch of the AFCFTA back in 2021 with my delightful colleague there, Mark. And I remember saying, you know, we've got to go past the talk, and the action. And we're still saying it now.
Yes.
In order to turbocharge, to deliver, what are the actions? Is there too much risk on the public side? Is there too much risk on the private side? How do we do it?
Well, so I think we need to look at what has worked. And one of my colleagues on the panel, I think it may have been Rose, or somebody talked about just looking at our examples. And if you think about what African corporates achieve. I mean, you can quote me anywhere. What they're able to achieve is phenomenal by any standards. I think it was McKinsey that said more than 300 companies today make $1 billion of revenue in Africa. And in 7 years' time, they can all add $500 billion to the wealth of this continent. What I'm looking to see is that the ambition that we've seen of people like Aliko, all of the large companies, that we can see them do what the Asian companies have done, which is advantage home base, springboard globally. And some of them are doing it. I was speaking to Mark earlier, and I was like, I mean, Olam, which everybody knows is an agro-processing, is a trading conglomerate with Chanrai, Chalarams, and others, was founded in Nigeria more than 100 years ago. But it's listed in Singapore, and people don't know that. Fast forward, Flutterwave, which started in Nigeria in 2016, has bought into 2 UK fintech companies. So we need to leverage the ambition that we've seen of many of these private sector leaders and see how we can do better with them. That's one. Second, they understand risk-taking on the continent. And when you understand risk-taking, you understand where people see risk, you see opportunity. And so what I want to see, and hopefully, and a lot has been done. I'm not trying to diminish what has been done. The AFCFTA can focus on truly breaking those boundaries. We need people to move more easily across the continent. We need people to work across the continent. I don't know how many people have an African Union passport. Can you raise your hands? The reason I ask is because that's the only way you can get around the continent without requiring either being part of a smaller free trade area or something. If we can just solve the problem of people being able to move and work everywhere, goods being able to move and work everywhere, services being able to move, we will accelerate what is going on the continent. I need to bring it home. You know, I speak finance all the time. Africa's wealth needs to be deployed in Africa. We're finding, thank you, you know, whether it's pension wealth, whether it's individual wealth, whether it's other institutional wealth, there's lots of wealth, but we're deploying it, buying very low return instruments around the world when the opportunities are on the continent. We don't have long-term financing because what keeps you as an entrepreneur, as big business, as a government, feeling comfort while you're investing is when you can get long-term finance. Long-term finance is still absent on the continent.
All right, thank you very, very much. I wonder, and I hate doing this because this is where it's getting really, really interesting. Could I have answers to 1 minute, 1 minute 30? Okay, so Mr. Olajide, I gave you a heads up. We're going to talk about ecosystems. You've traveled extensively. You've studied abroad. Is an entrepreneurial ecosystem currently here on the African continent? Where did you see the most exciting and inspirational ecosystem for entrepreneurs? And from what you heard earlier, this is 1 minute 30, from what you heard earlier, can the AFCFTA deliver?
Great question. Two things that I want to talk about in response to your question is the need for more entrepreneurship, and you talked about that as well. So I am also chairman of a holding company on the African continent, and we invest in agriculture, hospitality, technology, fintech, and all that. And there's just so much opportunity in Africa, so much, because it's incredibly underserved. Africa is underserved in every category. Africa is an entrepreneur's dream. Africa is an entrepreneur's haven. And I've said this publicly, I wish I had been investing on the African continent a long time ago. That's my regret. I'm doing that actively now. And in the past year, we've deployed tens of millions of dollars of our own capital, all cash. You know, not even anything leveraged. I'm sure there'll be lots of things I will do much later on. Our own capital, and I cannot deploy them fast enough. The opportunities are there. It's there. But one thing that's important is this. You know, you talk about corporates and entrepreneurs. I guess an advantage that we have is we have the infrastructure of a global organization already, and the discipline and the rigor of deploying capital in an efficient manner and making it work. So that system exists already, and there's a pool of talent globally. So there are massive, massive opportunities in Africa. Africa is underserved in every category. If you know the terrain and you want to bring your capital, this is the place to be. And as far as people saying, well, what are all the government issues there? Look, any serious corporate or entrepreneur, you get involved in public policy issues because you want to help protect the investments that you're making. That's just prudent ways of doing business. That's basic. So that's how I think about it. And then the last point that I'll make is this. There's a sense of pride that entrepreneurs need to have. Entrepreneurs are the ones that will build Africa. It's entrepreneurs that will build, entrepreneurs build societies. And I tell people all the time, yes, I'm an entrepreneur. I want massive returns on my investment at all times. But I'll make one point. Look, if the return on my investment will be 10%, just put the capital in and pull it out. Will I take 9% or 8% or 7% to see societies thrive and have this place be more conducive overall? Yes, I believe that business is a force for good. Okay. So beyond making profits, businesses should make societies better. And I think that sense of responsibility that entrepreneurs have will make a difference on the African continent.
Thank you. Mrs. Whitaker, we've heard about entrepreneurs and the environment. So I was looking through an index and ranking, and obviously I want to draw on the US experience. US came as number one for entrepreneurial support. Second was Rwanda in terms of the African continent. Globally, it was the US. Then we had, South Africa on the African continent, Rwanda, Morocco, Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana was seventh. What is it? Those figures may have changed, depends where you're looking, and I'm open to that discussion. But what is it about the US that allows, in terms of policy, is there anything that can be taken there that could be applied to the African continent? We want to deliver the AFCFTA.
Well, let me just be brief with that. I think one of the most important things that we did in the U.S., we delivered on the security front. We are a large integrated market, so when you talk about integrated market, our states were integrated, we're connected, but also we invested in research and development based on our comparative and competitive advantage. And we did it in agriculture. And I think that is where Africa's comparative and competitive advantage is in agriculture, value addition agriculture, and also seizing opportunities from this new green economy.
Okay, just very quickly, just to follow up on that. So obviously that's a country, we're now talking a continent, you know, we have ASEAN, we have the EU. Is that where things become unstuck, when you're bringing all 52 plus countries together?
Because I think you have to be organized internally in order to connect externally. Okay. So we were organized, and that's why we were able then to have a North American free trade area and connect with Canada, connect Mexico, and we're doing it globally. We have a lot of work to do, but Africa has more natural advantages and opportunities than America has ever had, in my view.
Thank you very much. Mr. Malloy, obviously entrepreneurship, private sector, we heard earlier that it's entrepreneurs and the private sector should own the space. That is key to delivering on the AFCFTA. But according to you, Africa has the wrong sort of entrepreneurs. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, we've developed a necessity entrepreneur, which is an entrepreneur who has to sell tomatoes on the sides of the street, cola on the side of the street. But we haven't created opportunity entrepreneurs who are intentional about what they're investing in, who are intentional about building value chains, who are intentional about building digitization, who are intentional about building, agriculture. So until we have more Dangotes who actually look and say, what are we going to do with petroleum in terms of developing it into multi-products, we'll continue to face the challenges we face. So really, where I take that is, if we look at the free trade, we have a great opportunity or we have a great threat. And the opportunity comes from investing in local entrepreneurs so that the FTA creates local industrialization. Because the risk we have is we're going to have foreigners invest in Africa, and Africa will remain the chattels. They will remain the laborers, and they will not actually benefit from the FTA. So it's important that it's entrepreneurial-led, and institutions like Afreximbank intentionally invest in champions in various sectors to make sure that AFCA-FTA is a success.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to Mr. Arturo Dalco, I want to go back to policy very quickly. I know it's a huge subject, but why does it take so long to get policy changes, to get things in place? Could you just give us a very brief insight?
Well, I think if it's owned by politicians alone, they're not necessarily in a hurry. So,
Right.
of course, I mean, elections sometimes force them to be in a hurry. But I think, but I think a typical example is the Malabo Declaration of 2014. They committed to 10% of their expenditure going into agriculture. So by 2025, we can triple intra-Africa trade in agriculture and services. I have a little think tank called Banque Institute. We did some analysis. First of all, only by 3 years ago, I don't know about now, only 7 countries had actually, if you like, domesticated the declaration. 2, majority of the countries were using less than 5%. In most cases, around 1% of the expenditure on agric. So it's really about the lack of commitment. And if the lack of commitment is not there, who will ensure that that commitment is there? And I think really a big chunk of it, yes, policies will speak. Because at the end of the day, if we say we are going to have free movement of people, goods, and services, and yet Ghanaian traders will cry foul if Nigerians come and establish shops here, then we have a problem. Of course, we see that in South Africa as well. So really, yes, there's policy, but also there's also a mindset. How do we see ourselves? Because when you are in Europe, they don't necessarily ask you which part of the continent you come from. And when you're black, wherever you are, so long as the continent remains where it is, you will not be respected. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. So we should begin to see the whole as a big chunk of ours, that we are part of the whole, that Africa's destiny and prosperity is linked to our individual well-being, and our individual well-being is linked to the prosperity of Africa as a whole. So I believe that, yes, policy matters, but at the end of the day, first is our mindset. Do we see ourselves as Africans first? And do we see it as an advantage? Because it is an advantage if we see beyond the borders. Those borders were not done by our ancestors. In most cases, they were not. Okay? So if we see ourselves beyond those borders and think that, look, you have something of value that I want. I have something of value that you want. How do we aggregate? If we look at it, and now they talk about the critical minerals. Just 30 seconds. The critical minerals.
Right.
The critical minerals or the green minerals are here in Africa. Okay? We have an opportunity to change the rules so that we maintain more of it here. A typical example is lithium. Okay? It costs about 120 million to set up a lithium and start production. Yet the 10 billion that we calculate, that one concession will earn in 10 years. Ask
Okay.
yourself how much of that will be in Ghana. So those are the things that I think we have to look at.
Well, I'm going to put that question to your colleague sitting beside you. Looking ahead, how do the figures stack up for the AFCFTA? How long do you think realistically it will take? We've heard that people are being impatient. This is not something...
Impatience is good.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Carry on.
No, I was just going to, as he was speaking, I was just reflecting on policy is extremely important because knowing how you're doing and everybody understanding and engaging is important. But, execution eats everything for breakfast. So my own sense of where we should be is to say, we'll take a few things, promise to deliver them in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, and deliver them. Rosa talked about the connectivity of the United States. If we deliver connectivity of this continent, whether digitally, by the way, I think that one of the things we've done and entrepreneurs have led is really leveraging technology. But on the public side, we haven't provided the anchor, the foundation, to make sure that we can truly leverage technology. So some logistics and just moving things. If we can take some major projects as AFCFTA projects, that would be amazing. If we can focus on R&D as well, and I feel like I'm echoing Rosa, so that things are actually homegrown, things are the things that focus on the needs of the continent. So policy, yes, engagement, bring us all together is good, but execution, let's have some examples that we can celebrate in a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time.
Okay, well, there's a promise. Hopefully I'll be with you in a year's time or 5 years' time to go through those examples. I want to thank my panel hugely for this event. Hang on. Now, I know some of you reinvested your first paycheck. Can I just have a show of hands? Who reinvested their first salary, age 10, 11 to 14? Hands up. Was that candy tasty? Yeah.
It's more entrepreneurship in Africa.
But I didn't reinvest it because I wanted to. My parents insisted.
Oh, fantastic. There you go. So, Mr. Niyi-John Olajide, Mr. Adam Molai, Mrs. Rosa Whitaker, and Gabby Asare Oteche Darko, and Mr. Ruma Ote. It's been a huge pleasure. Can I have a round of applause, please? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and a round of applause for Lukwesa Burak of the BBC. Wonderful end to a very, very full day. The first day of 3 days, of course. But for those of you in the hall here, you've certainly earned this. You are welcome to the Akwaba cocktail reception at the Kempinski Hotel this evening. It starts at about in 30 minutes at 7 p.m. and shuttle buses will shuttle you to the Kempinski Hotel. If you go out, straight out the doors, the ushers will direct you to the shuttle buses to the Akwaba cocktail reception. Tomorrow morning, please be back here early, 8 a.m. if you can be, to grab your seat for the opening ceremony, where we have several heads of states, including not just from across the continent, but from the diaspora. The Prime Minister of Barbados, for example, Mia Mottley, will be joining us. I'll be back here bright and early, but for now, that concludes day one of the Afreximbank Annual Meetings 2023.